Imagine being the first one to walk through a door and discover something so horrific, so utterly beyond anything you've ever trained for, that even years of service, endless crime scenes, and hardened instincts fail you. Your knees buckle, your breath catches. And in that moment, the room doesn't just smell like blood and decay, it feels haunted. Welcome to a case that broke the silence of a quiet American neighborhood and left even the most seasoned detectives visibly disturbed. You're not just watching a video right now, you're stepping into a real-life psychological maze, one that pulled apart families, rewrote assumptions about evil, and unraveled a truth so dark it didn't seem possible that one human being could do this to another. Stay with me, because in the next few minutes, you're going to find out exactly what happened behind those locked doors. This isn't just another true crime story. This is the one everyone whispered about but couldn't explain. And you're going to get the answer that brought detectives to their knees. I'm going to take you inside the investigation, deeper than any headline ever dared to go, and I'll guide you through the disturbing details, but not all at once. You're going to earn each truth, just like the detectives did. Piece by piece. Room by room. Now, I know your time is valuable. You clicked on this video for a reason. Maybe you saw the title and felt that chill run down your spine. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was the need to understand how something this twisted could happen in our world today. I hear you. I respect that. And I promise you, every second you spend here will lead you closer to the shocking truth that turned a quiet investigation into national news. This story is going to test what you think you know about people, about families, and about evil itself. So lean in. Get comfortable. Or don't, because once the details begin to unfold, comfort will be the last thing on your mind. Let me ask you something personal. Have you ever met someone who seemed perfectly normal until something didn't add up? A neighbor who was too quiet, a coworker who avoided eye contact, a family member who kept one room locked all the time? This story starts just like that, normal on the surface. A friendly neighborhood in the Midwest. Smiling faces, well-kept lawns, kids riding bikes. But under one rooftop, in one particular house, a secret was festering, hidden in plain sight. The kind of secret that could only be kept by someone who had mastered the art of deception. This is the case where police knocked on a door expecting a routine welfare check and walked straight into a psychological nightmare. And here's what will really get under your skin. No one suspected a thing. Not the neighbors. Not the school. Not even the closest relatives. Because what was happening behind those walls was carefully choreographed to appear completely innocent. But what the detectives would eventually uncover would force every single person involved to question how they missed the signs. This is not a story you'll want to pause. And it's definitely not one you'll be able to forget. Because it asks the scariest question of all. How well do you really know the people around you? Before we go further, let's meet the key people who turned this case into one of the most deeply disturbing investigations in recent memory. There's Detective Jason Klein, 32 years on the force, a reputation for staying calm under pressure. But even he admitted this case shook something loose in him. Then there's Lisa Moreno, the forensic psychologist who analyzed the crime scene and later described it as textbook sociopathy with a twist so dark, even I couldn't wrap my head around it. And of course, there's the family at the center of the storm, normal, church-going middle class. Or at least that's what they wanted everyone to believe. The truth? Let's just say, appearances can be deadly. We're diving deep into a world of hidden trauma, mind games, and one calculated move that exposed a web of manipulation so detailed it felt like something straight out of a thriller movie. But this wasn't fiction. This was real. And the way the truth came out, it wasn't through a confession or a careless mistake. It came through something so chilling, so unexpected, that even the tech experts who analyzed the digital evidence were left speechless. It's the kind of thing that makes your stomach drop. And yes, we're going there. Every last disturbing detail. But I'll let you in slowly. Because to really understand how this happened, you need to see how it started. How a seemingly ordinary life unraveled into one of the most twisted true crime stories of the decade. As the story builds, you're going to find yourself asking the same questions the detectives asked. How could someone do this? Why didn't anyone see it coming? And perhaps most haunting of all, What would have happened if they were never caught? Because here's the thing, this case almost went unnoticed. If not for one moment, one subtle mistake, one small thing that didn't sit right with one officer, this would have remained buried forever. And that single moment? It's the key that unlocked everything. You'll see what I mean soon enough. This video is more than just storytelling. It's a journey into the psychology of a killer who didn't just want to hurt, they wanted to control, to deceive, to dominate. You're going to hear from experts. You're going to see reenactments based on real testimonies. And by the end, you'll understand exactly why this case left every detective involved needing time off and therapy. But we're not there yet. We're still at the beginning. The part where everything seems fine. Where you'd walk by the house without a second thought. Where the main suspect smiled at the camera and no one thought twice. And now, here comes the moment that changed everything. The call that came in at 2:13 a.m. A neighbor's voice, shaky, unsure, but deeply disturbed. They hadn't seen the kids in days. The windows were always dark. The smell, something was off. Police thought it would be a quick check. Just to calm nerves. A knock on the door, a conversation, and then back to normal. But when that door opened, everything normal stopped. Right there, the door creaked open with a sound that felt almost theatrical, like it had been waiting to be opened at just the right time. What greeted the officers wasn't chaos, not at first. In fact, the entryway was oddly immaculate. A coat rack with 3 neatly hung jackets. Shoes lined up by size. The faint scent of air freshener battling something darker that lingered just beneath. The living room looked like it had been frozen in time. A cup of coffee still sitting on the side table, a children's cartoon paused mid-scene on the television. But there was no sound, no voices, no footsteps. Just a silence that hung heavy in the air, so thick that it made even the radio chatter from the officers feel intrusive. That's when Officer Daniels, a 10-year veteran with a calm demeanor, leaned toward his partner and said quietly, "Something's not right." He didn't know it yet, but he'd just stepped into the center of one of the most twisted criminal puzzles the state had ever seen. As investigators began to peel back the layers of what appeared to be a perfect suburban life, the focus quickly shifted to the man who owned the house, Thomas Beckett. 42 years old. A high school chemistry teacher. Married. 2 children. On paper, he was the kind of guy you'd never suspect. A regular fixture at PTA meetings. He hadn't shown up for work in 3 days, and when the school tried to contact him, they got a vague out-of-office reply that no one remembered him setting up. His wife's social media had gone silent, which was strange for someone who usually posted pictures of her kids' lunches and motivational quotes by noon. And the kids? No one had seen them at school or around the neighborhood since the previous Thursday. It was as if the whole family had just evaporated. A man who shared backyard beers with neighbors, gave out full-sized candy bars on Halloween, and led Sunday service youth groups. But beneath that mild-mannered exterior, something didn't add up. Known for coaching the local robotics team. At first, investigators assumed it might be a family emergency. Maybe someone got sick. Maybe they had to leave town unexpectedly. But then they found Thomas's car still in the garage. His keys on the counter. His phone on the charger. That was when things began to spiral. Detectives expanded their search, looking for any sign of movement. Security footage from a neighbor's Ring camera showed Thomas taking the trash out 3 nights ago, just after midnight. He didn't wave like he usually did. Didn't glance around. Just dropped the bag in the bin and went back inside without a word. The next morning, the trash was gone, but the garbage truck driver swore he never made a pickup that day. That was the first real crack in the story. The first eerie detail that made investigators feel like something far darker was brewing underneath the surface. Neighbors had mixed reactions when detectives began knocking on doors. Some said Thomas had always seemed like a stand-up guy. Others admitted there was something a little off about him, too quiet, too intense, too watchful. One woman recalled an odd encounter at a block party 2 months earlier, where Thomas got into a heated debate with another parent about ethics and control, a conversation that ended with him storming off. Another neighbor, A single mother named Jessica, who lived 3 doors down, said she once caught him watching her teenage daughter for just a beat too long as she walked to the mailbox. She brushed it off at the time, but now she wasn't so sure. These subtle stories, each harmless on their own, began to form a mosaic of doubt. The kind of retrospective discomfort that only surfaces when something terrible has already happened. But Thomas wasn't the only person of interest. As detectives dug into the family's recent activity, they discovered something unexpected: multiple transfers from the family's joint account to an unknown name, Benjamin Cross. The name didn't come up in any immediate family connections, but it wasn't long before they traced it to a former student of Thomas's. A troubled teen with a criminal history and a deep resentment toward the school system. He'd been expelled for bringing a weapon to campus 2 years ago and had reportedly sent threatening messages to several teachers, Thomas among them. At first glance, Benjamin seemed like the perfect suspect. Violent, unstable, and with a clear motive. But when police tracked him down, he had an alibi that checked out. He'd been in a halfway house under surveillance at the time of the disappearance. Still, something about the money trail didn't sit right. Why would Thomas be sending him cash? Was it blackmail? Guilt? Or something far worse? The more investigators searched, the murkier the picture became. One of Thomas's co-workers described him as brilliant but obsessive. Another said he was known for staying late in the chemistry lab, tinkering with things long after students had left. His wife, Emily, once joked at a school fundraiser that her husband was married to his experiments. A strange comment at the time, but now it carried a chilling double meaning. When detectives got a warrant to search the school lab, they discovered a locked cabinet no one had touched in months. Inside were detailed notes, chemical formulas, behavior models, and something titled simply Controlled Environment Protocols. It read like the beginning of a science fiction novel. But this wasn't fiction. This was real, and it was getting darker by the hour. Still, the real question remained. Where was the family? Every lead raised more doubts. Every discovery led to another unsettling truth. Friends who thought they knew the Becketts suddenly realized they hadn't spoken to them in weeks. Social media photos were tagged in multiple time zones. One post from Emily's account was timestamped from Arizona, even though she hadn't been there in years. Police began to suspect the accounts had been hijacked, used to throw them off. If that was the case, then someone was orchestrating a very deliberate deception. Someone who wanted them to believe the family had simply vanished of their own accord.
But why?
And then came the most disturbing detail yet. A neighbor's dog, one that had always barked relentlessly, suddenly stopped making noise around the same time the Becketts went silent. That same neighbor reported that their power flickered repeatedly that weekend, as if someone had been tapping into the grid. Investigators began to consider the unthinkable. Was the house itself part of a larger plan? Was it possible that someone had rigged the environment, that the family hadn't just disappeared, but had been contained? At this point, the theories were flying. Thomas had snapped. Emily had run. A third party had infiltrated their lives. Even the idea that Thomas was part of some underground experiment, an online theory that exploded once the case hit national headlines, began to gain traction. Reddit threads, YouTube shorts, and TikTok conspiracies spiraled, many suggesting this was part of a larger network. A real-life Truman Show. A family trapped in a psychological test gone horribly wrong. But the detectives on the case weren't interested in theories. They were looking for bodies. Answers. Closure. And that's when one of them, Detective Moreno, noticed something strange. A single light bulb in the basement had been replaced with a blacklight tube. And when they turned it on, the story continues. Let me know when you're ready for the next chapter. Things are about to take a terrifying turn. The blacklight flickered to life, casting an eerie violet glow across the concrete walls of the basement. At first, nothing stood out. Just the usual clutter. Old paint cans, gardening tools, a broken treadmill gathering dust. But then Detective Moreno saw it. Near the far wall, something began to emerge, faint splatters glowing under the UV. Not just one or two, but dozens. A chaotic spray pattern leading to what looked like an outline of a human figure. The kind of silhouette crime scene techs usually see only in blood spatter analysis. The detectives exchanged glances. They knew what this meant. Something violent happened here. But if that was true, where were the bodies? Where was the cleanup? And why hadn't the scent of death hung heavier in the air? Just as the team began processing the scene, something strange happened. The lights upstairs cut out completely. No flicker, no warning. Total blackout. Moments later, their radios went dead too. No static. Just silence. Detective Moreno's heart pounded as he reached for his backup flashlight and swept the beam across the basement, half expecting someone to be watching them from the shadows. When they made it upstairs, the front door, which had been unlocked when they entered, was now shut and locked. From the inside, no one had come in. No one had gone out. It was like the images had never existed. When the tech team reviewed the footage from the body cams, there was a 3-minute gap, completely blacked out. The only thing that remained was a brief static burst and a distorted voice barely audible in the background. "You need to stop." It was whispered almost like it was meant for someone specific. It sent a chill through everyone in the room. Then came the knock on Detective Moreno's office door. Back at the station, things got worse. The UV photos from the basement?
Gone.
Deleted. Not just from the SD card, but from the cloud backup system as well. The server logs showed no breach, no deletion, no error. But someone or something had tampered with the power and security without leaving a trace. It felt like the house itself was resisting them, like it didn't want them to uncover the truth. A man in a tailored gray suit introduced himself as Agent Laird from an unnamed federal agency. No badge. No explanation. Just a stern warning. You've wandered into something classified. This investigation is over. Moreno, of course, didn't back down. He'd seen too much. Too many questions unanswered. But Laird left behind a sealed envelope with a single line typed in all caps. The family never existed. The detectives were rattled, but they weren't done. Not yet. They turned to the only person who might know more, Emily Beckett's sister, Rachel. She lived 3 hours away and had been estranged from the family for years. When they tracked her down, her reaction was strange. Not fear, not confusion, but relief. "So it finally happened," she whispered. When pressed, she admitted something disturbing. Thomas had changed after a research fellowship 10 years ago. A program he never talked about. One funded by a now-defunct lab under a government contract. He came back different. Obsessive. Paranoid. He made Emily cut ties with friends, relocated them multiple times, and kept journals full of cryptic notes, some in codes no one could decipher. Rachel tried warning Emily. Tried pulling her away. But Emily wouldn't listen. "He said he was protecting us from something," Rachel said, tears welling in her eyes. "But I think he was the thing we needed protection from." Just when the detectives thought they had a breakthrough, Rachel went missing. Vanished from her home without a trace. No signs of struggle. No forced entry. But her laptop, where she kept copies of Thomas's old emails, was gone. Her phone, wiped clean. It was as if someone was systematically erasing the breadcrumbs, one by one. And then there's what happened next. A junior officer, eager to impress, dug into an encrypted folder on a recovered hard drive from the Beckett home. What he found made him physically sick. Images, symbols, and a video file labeled trial_001. No one knows what was on it because he destroyed the drive minutes after viewing it, locked himself in the evidence room, and smashed it with a fire extinguisher. When they found him, he was curled up on the floor, repeating one sentence over and over again. "It's already out." That's when the case shifted from bizarre to terrifying. Who or what was out? And why had Thomas Beckett spent years building protocols in secret, hidden in basement cabinets and encrypted files? But nothing could have prepared them for the final clue. Taped to the underside of Emily's old desk, hidden beneath layers of children's drawings, was a tiny slip of paper with coordinates. Remote. Isolated. In the middle of a dense forest bordering state land. The team prepared to investigate it the next morning. But that night, Detective Moreno's home security system pinged his phone. "Motion detected. Detective Moreno, didn't sleep that night. He sat in the glow of the security footage, watching that brief, bone-chilling clip on repeat. Thomas Becket, or someone wearing his face, standing motionless on the porch, just outside the camera's motion sensor radius. He never rang the bell, never knocked, just stood there for a full 98 seconds before turning and walking away into the dark. The timestamp was correct. But what made Moreno's stomach twist was the fact that Thomas Becket had been declared legally dead 2 years ago. His body was never found, but after months of silence and a trail that went cold in the middle of nowhere, it had been the only legal option for Emily to move on. And yet, there he was. Same jawline, same posture. But those eyes, as if something was using his body like a puppet. That morning, another twist shattered what little logic was left in the investigation. A nurse practitioner from a small-town clinic 2 states over-contacted the precinct. Her name was Megan Ralston. She didn't know Moreno, had never spoken to the Becket family, but she had stumbled upon something that forced her to reach out. 3 days earlier, a man came into her clinic, disoriented, malnourished, and badly bruised. He refused to give a name, but something he said during his ramblings froze her blood. The family never existed.
He told me to say it.
Over and over. But I remember them. The man vanished the next morning, slipping out unnoticed before the clinic opened. The clinic's security camera outside captured him wandering into the woods nearby. But the footage glitched and froze halfway through, just like at Moreno's home. The last visible frame before the crash showed the man looking straight into the camera, blood dripping from his nose, a smile stretching across his face, too wide to be natural. Moreno drove to the clinic immediately, but what he found was even more disturbing. In the man's room, hidden inside the lining of a discarded jacket, was a torn page from a children's book. Not just any book, the exact same one Emily Becket used to read to her kids, a rare, out-of-print edition from the 1950s. Scrawled across the illustrated page, in ink that shimmered strangely under light, were the words, "There's another one. She's still here." Tucked inside the jacket pocket was a second item, a vintage key with the initials RB etched into it, the same initials belonging to Rachel Becket, Emily's sister, who'd just gone missing. As if drawn by some unseen current, this secondary trail led Moreno to a remote foster home in Michigan, long closed and dunned. The building had been used in the late 90s for experimental therapy programs under a now-defunct nonprofit known for pushing psychological boundaries. Records showed that Rachel had lived there briefly during a 6-month period as a teen, something even her sister didn't know. But what stood out most were the visitor logs. Scanned and yellowed, nearly illegible, but with one consistent name that appeared over a dozen times: T. Becket. Thomas had visited this facility almost weekly before it closed down. There was no record of him having any connection to the foster system. No indication he had any siblings or children placed there. So, why was he there so often? As Moreno and his team searched the grounds, they found an old crawlspace beneath the counselor's quarters, sealed shut from the outside. Inside, among the mold and decaying floorboards, they discovered piles of hand-drawn images that could have come straight out of a child's fever dream. Crude sketches of masked figures with blank, glowing eyes. A family seated at dinner, with monstrous grins stretching across their faces. And beneath one image, a girl hiding in a closet with the words, "Don't let Daddy find me," scribbled over and over again. In the corner of the room was a shoebox filled with teeth. Real ones. Small, like a child's. Back at the precinct, while Moreno was processing this new, horrific discovery, his partner, Detective Harris, received a text on her personal phone, no contact name, just a blank screen and a string of numbers. At first, it looked random, like a phone glitch. But something about it made her uneasy. She entered the numbers into a GPS coordinate system. It pointed to a burial plot in an unmarked section of the Becket family's former town cemetery. When they unearthed the spot, there was no coffin, no gravestone, just a steel lockbox. Inside were photos.
Dozens of them.
Pictures of the Becket family, but none were normal. Every face in every photo had been burned out, scratched, or scribbled over except for Thomas's. In some of them, he was the only one smiling. In others, his face was replicated over every other family member's body. And taped to the bottom of the box was a single line of text, burned into the paper as if scorched rather than written. You trusted the wrong one. That's when things truly began to unravel. The more they dug, the more the story began to shift. Was Thomas ever really the villain? Or was he trying to protect his family from something much older, much darker? Had he been framed, or had he gone mad from something he stumbled upon and couldn't unsee? The theory that someone inside the department had been feeding information to an outside party began to take hold. Memos had gone missing. Case files were tampered with. Surveillance equipment had blind spots, always at the worst possible moments. One officer was even caught deleting footage of Rachel's last known sighting, claiming he'd thought it was irrelevant. When questioned further, he couldn't remember doing it. Swore he hadn't touched the files. Passed a lie detector. But still, the footage was gone. The department began to feel compromised, infiltrated by something that wasn't just corrupt, it felt manipulated. And then, just as Moreno and Harris began to piece together a new theory, a package arrived at the front desk. No return address. Inside was a single item. A USB drive, wrapped in a piece of skin-like latex, resembling a human ear. The label simply said, "Play me before you trust anyone else." What was on that drive would change everything. Detective Moreno had seen horror in every form, crime scenes soaked in blood, shattered families clinging to pieces of truth, killers who smiled through interrogations, but nothing had prepared him for what he witnessed on that USB drive. The screen flickered, then revealed what looked like a live feed from a hidden camera, angled low and grainy, but unmistakable. It was taken inside his own apartment. There were no windows in the frame, no identifiable objects at first, but then the shadow moved.
Slowly, cautiously.
The figure inched toward his bookshelf, gloved hands reaching behind the row of novels he hadn't touched in months. And then, as if knowing it was being watched, the figure turned its head directly toward the camera. The feed froze, but not before Moreno saw his own face staring back at him from that shadowed figure's body. Same features. Same tired eyes. Only this version was smiling. And the smile didn't reach the eyes. His first thought was panic, a primal urge to flee his own home, to torch it down to the ground and never look back. But he forced himself to breathe.
Think. Act.
He swept his apartment top to bottom, looking for hidden cameras, bugs, any clue he could grab.
But he found nothing.
It was as if the place had been scrubbed clean by someone who knew every inch of it better than he did. That night, he checked into a motel 3 towns over under a fake name. He didn't trust anyone. Not Harris. Not even the department. Especially not after the last 2 weeks. Too many conversations had ended the moment he entered the room. Too many files had gone missing. And now, someone had made it into a sanctuary, without leaving a trace. But things were only getting started. The next morning, Harris didn't show up for their scheduled debrief. No calls. No texts. Moreno tried her apartment, locked and dark. He called in a welfare check through a back channel, and when the local officers got there, they found her front door slightly ajar. The TV was still on. A cup of coffee sat half-drunk on the counter. But Harris was gone. No sign of struggle, no note, no message. Just an eerie, thick silence that settled into the space like a fog. The only clue left behind was a sticky note on her fridge, written in black marker. He lied about the foster home. The truth isn't buried. It's alive. Moreno couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched constantly. Every car behind him for more than 2 turns felt like a tail. Every stranger's glance lingered too long. At one point, in a small diner off the interstate, he caught a man watching him from a corner booth. When Moreno turned to confront him, the man simply smiled, mouthed the word "don't," and walked out, leaving behind a napkin with the words, "You're not him yet."
But you will be.
That message triggered something deeper, a fear Moreno hadn't allowed himself to entertain. What if this wasn't just a case? What if the twisted logic, the shifting facts, the missing time, and the phantom sightings weren't coincidences, but pieces of a design? A test, maybe. Or, worse, a transformation. He started questioning his own memories. He found old journal entries he didn't remember writing. Emails sent from his account that he swore he never typed. His voicemail was full of static messages, always at 3:33 a.m., with no voice, just that crackling hum, like something whispering just outside of hearing range. And each time, after listening, his vision would blur for hours. Then, the final blow came. His mother called him in tears. Someone had left a box on her porch, addressed to the mother of a detective. Inside were 3 items: a photo of Moreno as a child, a severed finger still wearing a department-issued ring, and a cassette tape labeled Day One. When she played it, all she heard was a child crying and a man's voice telling that child, "You'll forget. They always do." That night, Moreno hit a breaking point. He locked himself in the motel bathroom and stared at his reflection for almost an hour. There were lines on his face he didn't remember having last week. A twitch in his left eye that wouldn't stop. He opened his mouth and saw dried blood on his gums. And for a moment, just a flicker, his reflection didn't move with him. It stayed still, staring, waiting. It was no longer about solving the case. It was about survival. About finding out whether the version of him that had been digging through the shadows was the real Moreno, or something that had been created to take his place. And as he peeled back the final layer of one of Rachel Beckett's archived therapy files, long buried in the system under a sealed psychological code, he found a single line of redacted text left untouched. Subject exhibits dual awareness, believes reality is split, claims one version of her sister is dead, and the other is still watching. The walls of the mystery had closed in, and somewhere within it, a copy of himself, smiling, watching, planning, was waiting to make its move. Moreno always believed that every mystery had a center, a place where all the tangled threads met, where truth and fiction finally collided. But what he was about to learn shattered every assumption he'd built his case on. It wasn't just about Rachel Beckett anymore. It wasn't even about the twisted family secrets or the unexplainable surveillance. The truth had been hiding in plain sight, folded into the silence between conversations, buried under years of manipulated memories. And it all started unraveling when a message arrived from the one person he hadn't thought to question, his former partner, Harris. Her name popped up on his burner phone late one night. No caller ID, just one sentence. "You were never supposed to find the file, Moreno." The call cut out before he could say anything. But it wasn't the message that stunned him. It was the voice. That wasn't Harris. Not the woman he had worked beside for years. The cadence was off. The words too calm, too rehearsed. And yet, the voice knew things only she could have known. It felt like a warning. Or a confession. Maybe both. He raced back to her apartment. The one she had vanished from. This time, he came prepared.
Tools. Gloves.
UV flashlight. He tore through the place until he found something odd, an air vent behind the dresser that didn't match the blueprint. Inside, he discovered a small leather journal. It wasn't Harris's handwriting, but it was filled with notes about him. His habits. His cases. His triggers. But what made his blood run cold was the name listed on the very first page. Project Echo. According to the entries, he wasn't just a detective.
He was a subject.
A candidate. Every major moment in his career, the cases that had shaped him, the personal losses that pushed him deeper into obsession, had been orchestrated. Suddenly, memories he'd once buried came flooding back. A psychiatric hospital visit in his teens, he was told, was for sleepwalking. A woman in a white coat asking questions about how he perceived mirror versions of people. Notes on paper that always disappeared before he could show anyone. All of it had been real. And then came the final blow. He found a sealed envelope taped beneath the journal. Inside was a photo of him as a child, standing beside Rachel Beckett. Both smiling. Both wearing the same hospital wristbands. Moreno's hands trembled. His throat tightened as the edges of reality curled inward. He hadn't just known Rachel's name from a case file. He had known her.
Personally.
Intimately. They had been part of the same experiment, Children placed into controlled environments, observed under false identities. Their memories scrubbed, rewritten. The trauma wasn't just hers. It was his too. Only hers had fractured her completely, and his had turned into a relentless obsession with finding truth in other people's pain. They had both been searching for the same thing, answers to a life that had been stolen. The revelation changed everything. The enemy wasn't the shadowy figure following him. It wasn't even whoever had been watching his apartment or sending cryptic messages. It was the entire foundation of his identity. The badge he carried. The cases he solved. They were breadcrumbs placed in front of him, guiding him to believe he was solving mysteries, when in truth, he was the experiment. And Harris, if it even was her real name, had been his handler all along, guiding him, controlling his access. And now she was gone. He replayed the footage from his apartment again, this time slowing it frame by frame. And he saw it, finally, after hours of denying what he feared most. The figure in the video wasn't wearing a mask. It was him, not a copy.
Not a twin.
It was him, filmed days before the date of the file creation. It meant the footage had been recorded before he ever opened the case. Before Rachel Beckett's name ever entered his investigation log. It meant he had already found the truth once, and then someone had erased it from his mind. The real question wasn't who he could trust. That ship had long sailed. The question now was, what did they make him forget? And just as he sat in the motel room trying to piece together the fragments of his stolen past, his phone buzzed again. No number.
Just a video file.
He pressed play. The screen showed a dark room, lit only by a flickering lamp. A young girl sat on a cot, holding a doll. The camera zoomed in slowly until her face came into view, and the moment he saw her, he dropped the phone. It wasn't Rachel. It wasn't anyone he recognized. It was his daughter. The one he thought had died at birth. Only she was alive. And she whispered one word. Run. Moreno stared at the frozen image of his daughter on the cracked screen. Her small, pale face, the face he never got to hold, never even got to say goodbye to, was there, alive, terrified, and whispering a single word that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Run. The world around him slowed, the air in the room turned thick, and every sound seemed to vanish under the crushing weight of that single, devastating revelation. He'd spent years chasing the truth, exposing killers, unraveling lies so complex even the most seasoned detectives couldn't follow. But now, he wasn't chasing someone else's secrets. He was being hunted by his own. The lie he had accepted as truth, his daughter's death, had been manufactured, engineered. Someone had taken her, hidden her, and used her as leverage in a game he hadn't even realized he was playing. And then the phone rang. A man's voice, distorted through a filter, spoke clearly. You want her back? Then stop digging. You go any further, and she disappears forever. This is your only warning. Moreno didn't sleep that night. He couldn't. Every fiber of his being screamed for action, but he didn't know who to trust. His contacts in the department? Compromised. His old partner Harris? A ghost. Even the journalist who'd been feeding him intel had gone dark. So he turned to the only person left who might have answers, Detective Monica Reyes. She had retired early, under mysterious circumstances, and moved off the grid. They had worked one case together years ago. She was brilliant, cautious, and left without a word after a suspect mysteriously committed suicide the night before testifying against a federal agency. When he tracked her down in a remote Arizona desert town, she didn't greet him with relief. She pointed a shotgun at his tee. You were supposed to stay out of this, she hissed, eyes wide with panic and fury. If they know you found me, Jesus, you brought them here, didn't you? He pleaded with her, told her everything. Rachel Beckett, the journal, the hidden video, the chilling discovery about his daughter. Slowly, her grip on the weapon loosened, and for a long while, neither of them spoke. Finally, she walked to the corner of the room and opened a locked case. Inside was a thick file labeled Blackbird Protocol. You're not the only one they experimented on, she said, handing him a photo of a group of children in hospital gowns. These weren't just abductions. It was control. psychological engineering, behavioral conditioning. They wanted to create operatives, people who could be triggered to act on command and not even know it. Moreno flipped through page after page of classified reports, names he recognized, timelines that matched unsolved disappearances, even a document referencing a staged, infant fatality designed to sever emotional bonds and trigger trauma-based memory suppression. And there she was again,
His daughter.
Experiment 82L, tagged, high responsiveness, unbroken subject. Still alive. Still under surveillance. And that's when Reyes told him the worst part. If they know you're this close, you're going to be forced to choose. They'll offer you a deal. Walk away. Let her live in captivity. Or keep digging and risk her life. It didn't take long for the ultimatum to come. A courier arrived at his motel the next day with a flash drive and a handwritten note. You've seen enough. Trade your silence for her life. One word to anyone, and she disappears. On the flash drive was a live video feed.
His daughter.
Sleeping. Monitored. Unharmed.
For now.
The weight of the choice crushed him. Save her and live forever in ignorance, haunted by the dark machine that stole their lives, or keep searching and risk destroying what little chance she had to survive. Every part of him screamed to protect her, to stop, to vanish, to accept the deal and disappear into obscurity. But every scar he carried, every victim's face that had etched itself into his memory, reminded him that if he gave in, they would win. Again. And again. To them, he wasn't a father. He wasn't a man. He was a tool. Disposable. Replaceable. Programmed. And now, he had to confront the unthinkable. His sister, whom he trusted more than anyone, the only family he had left, was part of it. In a recorded phone call stored on Reyes's hard drive, his sister's voice appeared in surveillance logs.
Calm. Composed.
Authoritative. Giving status updates on Subject M. His code name. His case number. Her involvement was clear. She had watched him, reported on him, maybe even helped erase parts of his memory. And worse, she had visited the facility just 2 weeks before his daughter had been born. The betrayal cut deeper than anything else. She had lied to him for years, woven herself into his pain, offered comfort while orchestrating the very chaos that nearly destroyed him. Now, he had to decide whether to confront her, to find out why she did it, if there was any part of her that regretted it, or to use her access to expose everything. But if he went to her, he might walk into a trap. And if he didn't, he might lose the last piece of the truth he needed to bring it all crashing down. Just as he stepped out into the desert air, struggling to breathe under the weight of it all, his burner phone buzzed again. No text. Just a location pin. In the middle of the desert. Marked with one word. Facility. Was it a setup? A rescue site? A grave? He had no choice but to find out. Because now, it wasn't just about saving his daughter. It was about burning the whole system to the ground. And he was willing to risk everything, his life, his sanity, even the last shred of family he had left, to finish what they started. The sun was beginning to set, casting a blood-red glow across the desert as Moreno approached the coordinates sent to his burner phone. The land stretched out like a forgotten graveyard, broken only by rusted fencing, collapsed watchtowers, and the faint outline of an underground facility barely visible beneath the shifting sand. He'd expected a building, guards, maybe even an ambush. But what he found instead was a hatch, partially buried, leading into darkness. The air down there felt old, stale, heavy, like time itself had stopped moving. He hesitated for only a second before lifting the rusted handle and disappearing into the abyss. The deeper he went, the colder it got. Every footstep echoed like thunder, and every shadow seemed alive with secrets. The halls were lined with faded posters in military jargon, abandoned lab coats, shattered glass, and broken monitors still flickering with remnants of data logs. But what chilled him most were the names. On the walls.
Dozens of them.
Not just children, but adults. Doctors. Operatives. Civilians. Case numbers etched beside each name. Experiments. Projects. Executions. Some names were crossed out. Others had timestamps. One name stood out: Monica Reyes, marked terminated. Moreno's heart slammed in his chest. She was alive when he left her. Had someone followed him? Was she just another pawn sacrificed the moment she outlived her usefulness? A sudden noise, footsteps. Not his. He ducked behind a row of rusted filing cabinets as two figures entered the room, speaking in hushed tones. One of them wore tactical gear. The other was Harris, his old partner, the man he trusted with his life. "You think he'll come this far?" the soldier asked. "He's already inside," Harris replied, voice calm. "And we're going to let him see everything. That's what they want. He's the final trial." Final trial? The words didn't even make sense until Moreno looked down and saw a file left open on the desk beside him. Subject M. Phase 3 activation. Voluntary awareness. Emotional collapse. Final directive assessment. And beneath that, subject will be allowed to uncover the truth independently. If he chooses to expose the program, he fails. If he integrates and accepts leadership, he succeeds. He wasn't investigating a conspiracy. He was the conspiracy. All of this, Rachel Beckett, the journal, the threats, the missing daughter, had been crafted, carefully laid out, designed to manipulate him. Every move, every clue, every emotional trigger, it had all been programmed. And the worst part? He'd walked right into it. Suddenly, the walls felt like they were closing in. His daughter, the one he thought was stolen from him. Was she even real? Or was she just another part of their control? He stumbled backward, knocking over a metal bin. Harris spun around. "Moreno," he called, stepping into view, gun lowered. "It's time you stopped running and accepted what you are. You were never the hero. You're the product." But before Moreno could respond, alarms blared throughout the compound. Emergency lights bathed the corridor in pulsing red. A voice echoed over the intercom. Female, authoritative, cold. "Security breach detected. All personnel evacuate immediately. Containment protocol initiated." From the corner of his eye, Moreno spotted a flicker of movement. Another person running through the corridor. It wasn't a soldier. It was his sister. She looked panicked, disheveled, nothing like the composed handler he imagined from the audio logs. She shoved something into his hands, a worn photograph and a keycard. "They lied to me too," she said breathlessly. "She's real.
She's alive.
But they're moving her. Tonight." Harris raised his weapon. "Don't listen to her. She's manipulating you again. She's always been part of it." Moreno's mind reeled. Everything around him screamed danger. Conflicting truths, collapsing loyalties, a history rewritten by hands that molded trauma into obedience. If he followed his sister, he might find his daughter. If he stayed, he could destroy the entire operation from within. But the truth had become a poisoned well. Drink from it, and you lose yourself. Ignore it, and you live in chains. Then the floor beneath them rumbled violently, an explosion, followed by a rush of smoke and heat. Debris rained from the ceiling as the entire facility began to shake. Time had run out. Harris lunged. His sister screamed. The smoke stung his eyes as Moreno staggered down the collapsing hallway, every footstep echoing like a countdown to the inevitable. Lights flickered, alarms wailed, and the ground trembled beneath him with each aftershock. The air reeked of scorched metal and betrayal. His sister had vanished into the chaos, taking with her the photograph and keycard, leaving him with nothing but questions that clawed at his sanity. But he had one destination in mind: the operations wing. If there were answers, if the truth had a pulse, it would be found in the black box server room buried deep beneath the compound, where every memory of this twisted experiment was logged, encrypted, and hidden. He pushed through the fire door with all his strength, coughing from the heat and the pressure building behind him. Inside, the room was strangely quiet, humming only with the low sound of machines still alive. He approached the main terminal, swiped the keycard, and waited. What appeared on the screen wasn't a list of classified files or mission briefings. It was a video, time-stamped 3 years ago. Rachel Beckett.
Bound.
Frightened. Speaking to someone just out of frame. "He'll never believe it," she said, voice trembling. You've twisted him into someone he doesn't even recognize. But I remember who he was before. I remember. The screen cut to static. Then another file opened. It was him. Hooked to wires. Eyes closed. Voice calm. Directive complete. Emotional regression stabilized. Subject unaware of real daughter's status. Rachel to be removed after behavioral trigger. Subject will react with aggression, leading to full psychological fracture and self-doubt. Project success rate, 93%. Moreno felt like he was drowning in acid. The memories, every desperate lead, every sleepless night, every moment he thought he was chasing the truth, were lies fed to him like poison. But the worst part wasn't that Rachel had been taken. It was that he had ordered it. In a previous phase. In a role he didn't remember. Then the door behind him slammed shut. Harris stood there, weapon drawn, face unreadable, like the devil himself had crawled out of a uniform. "You found it," he said. "That makes this a hell of a lot easier." Moreno turned slowly, rage burning through every cell. "You used me. All of you." Harris nodded. "And you let us. Because deep down you wanted to be used. You were tired of guilt. Tired of pain. You wanted clarity. Purpose. We gave you that. You destroyed everything I loved.
No.
You sacrificed everything you loved. Because you believed the mission was more important than your morals. You volunteered for this. You gave us your memories, your loyalty, even your family. You created this entire plan. We just followed your design." That was the breaking point. Moreno lunged, knocking the gun away as the two men crashed into the server rack, sparks flying around them. The fight was brutal, personal. Not just two soldiers clashing, but two lives tearing at the seams. Fists flew, blood smeared the steel walls, and for a moment, the lines between hero and villain vanished completely. Moreno had no idea who he was anymore, only that Harris had become the face of everything he wanted to destroy. In a final, desperate move, Moreno slammed Harris into the main terminal, the screen shattering as code flooded the monitor. Files began auto-deleting. Emergency lockdown initiated. Harris coughed, smirking through the blood. "You just erased your daughter's location. You'll never find her now." But then came the twist. As Harris slumped to the ground, barely conscious, Moreno heard another voice. A young girl. From behind the wall.
"Daddy."
He froze. Looked up. A hidden speaker crackled to life, followed by the mechanical sound of a door unlocking behind one of the storage shelves. He pulled it open and found her, not a hallucination, not a memory.
Alive.
Real. Terrified. She rushed into his arms, crying into his chest. But just as relief washed over him, the screen blinked once more with one final message. Subject M has chosen family over mission. Cognitive disobedience confirmed. Final protocol authorized. Total memory reset. Initiating in 3, 2. Everything went white. And as the screen faded to black, viewers were left with one final question burned into their minds. Was she really saved? Or was this just another layer of the program? In the days that followed, silence took on a new weight. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind that comes after storms so violent it leaves the landscape unrecognizable. Moreno awoke in a private recovery facility tucked away in the outskirts of New Mexico, the kind built for people the world was never supposed to know existed. The walls were soft gray, the windows were tinted, and every morning came with a nurse who never answered questions. His mind was foggy, but the memories, no longer buried, no longer fractured, started piecing themselves together. The trauma wasn't gone. The pain wasn't dulled. But the truth was finally clear. Rachel had been a casualty in a game he designed but no longer remembered. A game built on manipulation, on sacrificing morality for outcomes, on believing that a greater good was worth any cost. He had authorized it all, erased his guilt, and become the very thing he once swore to fight. But something didn't add up. The girl, his daughter, wasn't there anymore. No visitors. No confirmation. Just a stack of incident reports and blank stares from the staff. He asked every day. Was she real? Had he really pulled her from the clutches of that facility, or had the system gifted him one last illusion before the reset? The director claimed she'd been relocated for her safety, that she was fine, that he would see her when the time was right. But Moreno had heard that before. Words tailored to keep a patient quiet, obedient, dependent. That's what the program was always about, controlling the narrative, shaping perception, feeding hope when needed, and snatching it away when useful. The truth? It was whatever they needed it to be. And that was the most dangerous part. He sat each evening by the window, staring at the horizon, as if it might offer answers. He remembered the face of Harris, remembered the sound of Rachel's voice in that broken video, remembered the sterile scent of the server room, and the way the ground felt like it might split open beneath him. There was no courtroom trial, no press coverage, no justice in the conventional sense. The whole thing had been buried beneath redacted files and burned data. His memories were the only evidence it had ever happened, and even those were starting to feel like shadows. Still, something inside him refused to let go. Late one night, a nurse slipped a manila envelope under his door. No name, no explanation. Inside was a single photograph, him holding his daughter in the hallway just before everything went white. They're left with a knot in their stomach and a question that won't go away. If the truth can be rewritten, how do we ever know what's real? Moreno's story might be ending here, but the implications stretch far beyond him. Into every institution, every secret agency, every shadowy decision made behind closed doors. And somewhere, someone is watching, calculating, preparing the next phase. Because in a world built on deception, the most dangerous thing you can do is remember. He stared at that photo for hours, his heart pounding with something between fear and purpose. This wasn't over. The rabbit hole went deeper. There were still layers to the game that hadn't been played. And maybe, just maybe, the people pulling the strings had left a crack in the door. A flaw in the system. A reason for him to start looking again, not for revenge this time, but for redemption. The final shot fades to black, but the audience isn't left with a clean ending. They didn't erase everything. Find the woman in Arizona. The image was grainy, almost like surveillance footage, and on the back, in red ink, were the words,